Ladies and gentlemen, signore e signori, buonasera, buon pomeriggio. It's a pleasure to welcome you to today's talk, which is part of our series dedicated to the history of photography in Italy, held by Giovanni Aloi, art historian and lecturer at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago and at the Sotheby Institute of Art in New York and London. Giovanni has walked us over the past almost 6 months through a century and a half of photography and has finally unveiled for us a few weeks ago the work of a few masters of contemporary Italian photography. So I'm particularly glad today to continue such focus on present times with Marco Garofalo, whom I welcome. Benvenuto, Marco, and thanks for having accepted our invitation and for bearing because Marco is in Italy, so it's 11 p.m. So it's been very patient waiting for us all day. So grazie anche per questo, Marco. Marco has worked as a photo reporter for over 25 years, focusing on social and cultural issues, mainly between Milan and the African continent, and placing energy and environment at the center of his work, thus tackling in particular the issues related to the access to energy and to energetic transition. The talk Marco will first present and talk about his work, and then he will engage in a conversation with Giovanni, who will also briefly introduce Marco's work and how this talk gets together in the series of our conversation. As usual, I encourage you to take part to the conversation by using the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. And I remind you that we are live on Facebook and that the talk is being recorded and will be soon available on our YouTube channel. So please, Giovanni and Marco, I leave you the floor and the virtual floor and the screen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luca. Always a pleasure. And I just wanted to quickly connect today's event, the conversation that Marco and I are going to have with the series of talks given over the past few months. We worked our way up in time, starting from the 19th century, the invention of photography during the first 30 and 40 years of the 19th century, and then exploring how photography changed the history of Italy, the understanding of what Italy can be all the way up to today, and focused as well on the idea of ideology and how the Italian landscape and social portrait is being currently reinvented by contemporary photographers who are no longer happy to subscribe to the traditional rhetorical bucolic idea of an Italy that belongs to the past. So it is in this context that tonight we're going to look at the work of Marco Garofalo. He's a very interesting photographer working at the border of art and reportage and blurring these boundaries consistently. And with the next and last appointment for this series, we're going to talk to contemporary Italian photographer Silvia Camporesi. So it'd be a very interesting experience to hear directly from Italian practitioners how they live photography today in Italy and of course abroad. So without any further ado, Marco will introduce for us some of his work to give us an idea of what he's been busy with, and then we'll follow up with the conversation.
Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, everybody. Ciao a tutti. As Giovanni said, I'm working in the field of photography since many years now. I've been started in Milan as almost all photographers start in the field of fashion, actually, because Milan is of course a fashion city, and in those years in the past there was a lot of work for us. So at the beginning, that was a very, very interesting and very important school because you learn how to use lights. Photography is of course mainly a light issue, but in the years and with many experiences I've done as an assistant first, and then with my first jobs, I understood that my attitude was more into street photography and social photography, like documentary photography mainly. Even if I have done also some little experiences in news, but I didn't like very much working in the daily news, let's say. I wanted more to travel and to meet other culture and try to photograph and then present what I've seen with my eyes and with my camera to the people here in Italy mainly. So, well, after the first experiences, as I told you, in the fashion, and then also in the darkroom, because I've been started also to work for a darkroom printer, a traditional printer, silver printer. Then I start to make my first travels, and I have to say that almost straight away, Africa was in my objective, or in my destiny, I have to say. Because my first trip I've done in Africa was with one of the most important master of photography, American master of photography, which is Alex Webb. And that was 2001. I went to Nigeria with Alex Webb, and that was my African baptism in a way, in one of the worst area actually, because it was in Niger Delta, in an area called the Biafra, that I'm sure that all of you know. Well, from that moment on, I started to travel and to ask to magazines and newspaper to send me in Africa. So it's now almost 20 years that I'm traveling and working in Africa, of course. Last trip was more than 2 years ago, and then COVID, of course, ruined our plans. But I had the chance, and if you want, I can talk to you and explain you my very last piece of work, and then we go back, you know, Giovanni, if you want, because Africa has a very important role, I have to say, in this piece of work, which is called Energy Portraits. As you said, it's now since 4 or 5 years that I'm working in the environmental and energy issues. And thanks to an important Italian foundation, which is called Fondazione AEM, I had the chance to travel in Africa, India, and Bolivia, and look for stories concerning those people, those almost 1 billion people. But I have to say that nowadays it's fortunately decreasing, but there is still 800,000, 900,000 of people living without energy access in the world. Mainly, we're talking about electricity, but energy, as you know, it's everything, it's everywhere. So it's electricity, it's fire, it's water, everything is related to energy. But I focused mainly on access to electricity, because electricity is very important to power our modern mobile phones and laptops and you know, what is called the modern energy. And in Milano, in Chicago, or in Arusha, in Tanzania, in the Kilimanjaro, the necessities are almost the same. The problem is that of course, someone has to relay with what the amount of energy available. So in 2017, I started to travel in, and if you want, while I talk, I can show you some of the pictures from the catalog of. And let me see, just give me a sec, and I will share screen, so I would be less boring. Let me see. Okay, let's see this. So it's also in English. This is, can you see it? All right, perfect. This is out of the website energyportraits.org, which collects all the pictures and actually all the events that we do, not just me, because I work with a team. I'm the photographer, but there is also a journalist, someone editing the texts, and someone working, of course, with the website, but also researchers, because when I travel, there's someone who's making the research before and pointing me where to go, because it's not easy, of course, because we look for stories in the in the worst place, in the farthest away points of the world. So as some of you might know, in 2015, I'm reading, ensure universal access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy has become a UN, United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. It's the number 7, SDG number 7. So energy access is nowadays recognized as a prerequisite to any development target. So in the field of SDG number 7, we have started to travel. And the first trips we've done were in Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana, because 2/3 of these billion people in the world without energy access live in Africa. So if you see Africa from a satellite picture, you would see a very dark spot. That's why probably they call it the dark continent. Of course, I'm joking, but it's really a dark, you know, continent from a satellite picture, except for a few bright spots, you know, on the major capital cities, Johannesburg, Lagos, or Cairo city. Of course, you know, it's all the lights, it's concentrated in those areas. The rest of the continent is really without energy, without lights. So what I've done, I've been working with two different levels. One level is related more to reportage photography, and the other one is that gave the name to this job is the energy portrait. So mainly family portraits in their houses, showing me their electric and electronic equipment they have in the house. So as you can see on the table, or for instance, in this family in El Alto, La Paz, Bolivia, at more than 5,000 meters over sea level. As you can see, you know, all these equipment. Or another part, of course, in Ghana, for instance, you know, there are just very few little things. And then I always take my drone with me, and I take pictures also to energy plants, mainly solar plants. So I try also to give an eye to the solutions. So not just, you know, the bad things or the problems. So you can scroll yourself if you go on the website, of course. And the collection then has been closed in this small catalog, which is has been done for an exhibition that has been displayed in many places. But this is just the first chapter of the story, because this is, let's say, the global south, as it is called. And in 2020, we were supposed to travel in what is called the global north, so the Western countries, the rich countries, let's say, to document the richness of energy. But then, of course, again, the COVID ruined our plans. But it will be soon done, this. Now I'm working on a focus, on an Italian focus related to energy transition. because as I told you, I also give an eye to the solutions, and then we'll go to Europe, to some countries in Europe. One of the countries I want to visit is Poland, because Poland is 75% of the energy in Poland is still produced by black coal. And this is something that soon must be quit, must be finished. But still, I mean, it's very, very important for those countries. So I want to go there and study photographically those stories.
Marco, it's really a very interesting body of work. I've always been fascinated since I came across this project. And I guess one of the questions it kind of brings to the fore for me is, how do you think these photographs help? How do they mobilize? Obviously, I've learned a lot through them, and they display a side. Africa, I think, is a really complex, representationally speaking, I think Africa is a very complex entity, because it's always compressed by cliches that we have picked up along the way in various different capacities, whether it's at school and then again through the news. And what I like about this project and what you do with it, it's this you visiting personally and photographing what we would otherwise not see. Even the idea, thinking about Africa through electricity and the absence of electricity, really adds a new dimension to a certain discourse. And I was wondering, how do you see these images? You talk about solutions, and I was wondering how do you see these images moving perhaps beyond information, where information is already important as it is. But I wonder if there's something else that you see mobilized by these images.
Well, as you said, images are very important. I must say that this piece of work is born because one of the journalists, which is traveling with me, in 2016 made a book which was called Energy Poverty, because he's an expert of energy, and he was working on energy poverty, which is a very important issue. But that was a written book, and he had a lot of difficulties to distribute the book and to let the people read the book, because it was very technical, and people, except of course of the people expert of energy issues and energy problems, the rest of the world was not understanding properly the problem. So that's why he told me, Marco, let's go and let's ask to Fondazione M to make the production of a photographic book, photographic exhibitions. And so the photography suddenly became the most important medium to explain the energy. And they said, okay, why not? Of course, we'll be happy. But the first question I asked myself was, how do I recognize energy, and how do I photograph energy? I mean, that was very, very key to understand, and to work, because it was, I mean, as I said before, energy is everywhere. Everything is crossed by energy, everything. But it's not easy to photograph. So of course we started to photograph the plants, but it still was very cold, I mean, it was not interesting to let the people understand. So that's why the energy portraits came in our mind, because every time we were going to, for instance, in Africa, but even in India, but mainly in Africa, let's say, to photograph those people, we always had to ask the permission, especially in those, very far away villages, for instance, in Kilimanjaro, or in Kenya, or in Ghana. We had to ask the permission to the chief of the village. And you know, it's like, you know, you go to someone house, you first you knock the door and you present yourself, and then if they want, they let you in. And that's what we were doing. The problem is that, you know, when you knock and you present yourself and they present themselves, it will take usually 2-3 hours. But it's, you know, it's part of the job, and I'm very happy to do this, of course. But we start to understand many things, you know, with these questions. I remember few also funny moments. For instance, I remember in Tanzania, in some very far away area of Tanzania, one of these chiefs told me, when I asked, what do you need the energy for? And he told me, the energy for us is very important because light is important. Because our young people must walk in the streets in nighttime, very, you know, safe, because light is safe for them. And so I asked him, why? I mean, there are problems here in the nighttime. What kind of problems? I mean, there are smugglers, robbers, or I mean, drug dealers. And he told me, no, what are you talking about? There are lions. Okay, I said, all right. So that was, you know, their issue. I mean, light is, I mean, a enlightened house is a safe house. And to me, I mean, I was like, wow, something really, you know, new for me. But, you know, after these interviews, we start, you know, to have a different approach. You know, for instance, I went also to a Masai, very old Masai, and I asked him, what do you need the energy for? And he answered me straight away, and you, what do you need the energy for? I mean, you know, it was a kind of mirror in a way, you know, because the energy needs are absolutely the same everywhere. So there's no point that we have a lot of energy, for instance, here in Milano, and now probably I'm consuming more energy than Masai people in a month. So from that point on, we start to photograph. For instance, this picture that you see here, it's a very important picture because this Masai family, of course, here in this part of Kilimanjaro, very high, the TANESCO, which is the national company, electric company of Tanzania, can't reach those houses because they are very spread, you know, very far away. So the Maasai people, which are very smart and very strong community, ancient community, they start to learn solar energy. They start to use the solar panels on the roof of their boma, which is the, you know, the typical house of mud and wood, and with 70 watts, now they can really power all they need, and all they need, of course, it's less than us. But as I said, as they are very smart, for instance, they don't use the last model of iPhone, which, you know, the battery lasts 2 hours. They use probably the old Nokia that, you know, the battery lasts for 3 days, but they don't need, you know, to play to Candy Crush Saga every time, or check, you know, the Facebook or social networks every 3 seconds. And I think we have to learn a lot out of this. But anyway, I have to say that this picture has been also used by United Nations on a social campaign called Eye on Climate a couple of years ago, 3 years ago probably. And also Leonardo DiCaprio has used regrammed this picture to talk about, of course, energy and environment. And this is something funny that I can say also. After 3 days, probably there were like 500,000 likes and more than 2,000 comments. But all the comments were like, I love you, Leonardo. Thank you, Leonardo, for what you do. Mr. DiCaprio, marry me. And nobody wrote a nice picture. Well done, Mr. Photographer.
I'm sure they all thought it was a nice picture. They're very, very striking and very intriguing at the same time. So talking about, this is a fantastic project. I'm so impressed by it. It's also something I hope to have the opportunity to engage with more. Certainly going to talk to my students about it and hopefully write something about it too. I also wanted to ask you something more just generic about photography, since you are you've been dealing with photography for a long time. We're both men of the world, been around the block a few times. Would you say it's all about digital or analog? What is your preference? Where are you at? How have you made these photographs, for instance, in Africa?
Yeah.
Would you work with digital or would you work with analog photography?
Well, as I'm getting older, an old photographer now, I started, of course, with film and slides. As I told you, my photography was born in darkroom, and I liked it very much, you know, because I had the chance to develop and print my own pictures. I had a very good master I was working for, and that was a very, very interesting and very important exercise, a very important school for me to understand photography. Because when you work with other people's negatives, you really can learn a lot. And, you know, first of all, you learn to read photography through a negative, not through a positive. So that gives you, I don't know, something in your head that you must understand the positive, the print, out of a negative. So you start to touch and to feel photography, lights and shadows and medium tones. And then, of course, the chemistry is very important. So it's a very magical moment. When you work in a dark room, you know, in the darkness, you have a lot of time to think and to relax. My master, Giancarlo Vaiarelli, which is a impressive master. Now he works just with platinum and palladium. He's still working, because now and then we will talk, if you want, about this. There is a return of traditional printing. So, and he was always telling me, if you want to work in a dark room, you must have the inner light, the light inside. And when I was 20 probably, and it was like, wow, yes, that's true. So it's like kind of Jim Morrison dark room or something like that. But and then of course my first pictures, both fashion, because as I told you, I was working as an assistant for fashion, but then I started to make my first reportage. I started, of course, in black and white, because I was developing and printing myself. And then I also had another good friend, which was the chief of AGFA. Do you remember AGFA? Of course, now he's failed, but it was very, very strong in Italy, very important company for films, especially for slides. And the chief of the lab of AGFA was a friend of mine, and he was helping me very much, because I was a poor photographer, so he was giving me as present for free a lot of films and slides. So most of my works were in slides. So I have to say that I was very happy, and I mean, but then at the beginning of 2000 years, I was still working as an assistant and doing my first jobs, and I had the chance to enter the Grazianeri agency, which was, you know, one of the most important agent in Italy for almost 40 years. And this agency closed down because of the they to me they didn't understand properly the come si dice, il passaggio,
the transition between, I assume, digital, between analog and digital, right?
Between analog and digital. Because of course they had a huge archive,
right.
Traditional archive, and they had to transform it in digital, and it was just impossible to do it. And then a lot of photographers of my generation had a little difficulties at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Also because it was very expensive. Cameras were very expensive. Memories were very expensive. So, you know, I remember there were a few older photographers than me that quit the job in a way. And we had to run, you know, towards digital. But then I have to say that I would never come back anymore. I mean, nowadays, I love digital. Mm-hmm. And especially for a reporter, for a photo reporter, documentary photography, but also probably mainly for news photographers. I mean, time is our main resource. And, you know, with films, you had to photograph, to develop, wait. Of course, we've lost the poetry, if you want, of the latent image. Does it make sense? L'immagine latente, you know? I mean, it's a very, very important concept, as well as the original. We lost the concept of the original in a way. But we earned a lot from digital, for me, for my job. I mean, I take a picture and after 5 seconds is already some.
Would you like to show us another one of your works?
Sure.
Thank you.
As you were saying, we're talking about Africa. I can show you very little, let's say, well, these are kind of multimedia. I've mixed up some pictures and some videos. For instance, this is done in South Africa. Well, I have to say that I work for a magazine called Africa, which is an Italian magazine. Probably in Europe is one of the most important magazines talking about Africa, and they fight the stereotypes of the you know, the typical image that most of the people think about Africa. So we always look for interesting stories, positive stories, and you know, very modern stories, or traditional stories in modern cities, like this one, for instance. It's about sangomas, which are the traditional healers of South Africa. It's very, very quick, but I show you. Huh? Let me just. Am I sharing the screen now?
Not yet.
Okay. Let me see, because where am I? Here. Share screen. Let's see. Can you see now?
Yes, we can.
So this is a kind of small trailer. I always look for a production, as everybody does, and also I always try to create these small teasers and look for a production. But I have to say that it's very, very difficult to find a production, especially in Africa or in countries. That nowadays it seems that they're not interesting for the media. I don't mind. I go on and I work. And let me show you another one. Congo. Share screen. Let's try this. Open with, let's say, let me see. Okay. Oops, sorry. What happened?
You need to open the file first and then share the file. Yeah.
What happened?
You need to open the file first and then share the screen after the file is open.
I don't know what happened. Just a second, huh? Okay, again, share screen. Share.
Yep.
Can you see?
Yep.
So as you can see, these are different stories, let's say, different point of view, and this is what I like. So I always ask to the director of the magazine to give me these kind of stories. I like very much working. Well, my first, for instance, after the trip with Alex Webb in 2001 in Nigeria, my first piece of work in Africa was in Senegal about the origin of hip-hop music, which of course are American, the origin, but as you know, the Afro-American community, the roots of this syncopatic rhythm, it seems that it comes from some ancient songs, traditional songs from Senegal. So I've been sent to from an Italian magazine to look for this roots, and it was very, very interesting. I mean, I was very young, and but after that moment on, I always looked for these kind of stories.
Do you have a feel when you're visiting Africa for work as an Italian photographer? Is there a shadow of colonialism that follows you in the way you present yourself or in the way you received by does that come into the equation in terms of a concern or a consideration, or is it something that perhaps exists more in the conversations that people have about relationships between Africa and countries that were involved in colonialism? Is it something, I'm basically curious about how that feeds into these colonialist pasts feed into your presence as a photographer, documenting,
Sure,
representing.
Well, I have to say that, as you know, Italy doesn't have a huge colonialistic history, except for, of course, Eritrea, Libya, and we, of course, we also had very and terrible responsibilities in some areas, but probably because we are not very able to, you know, the history teaches us that Italians are not very good in making wars, and probably also colonialism. I never felt this kind of weight. I don't know how to say. But in a way, sometimes, just as a Western person, I feel, you know, the responsibility of hundreds of years of brutal colonialism. But when I explain what I do before, you know, I'm not the person, I'm not the photographer who goes in the scene and start photographing straight away without explaining the job. I rather prefer to spend a lot of time before, you know, making the the click and explaining what I'm there to do, and it always work for me. It always work. And in fact, as soon as well, I've been traveling probably now more than 20 countries in Africa. As soon as these people know that I know that Africa is not, there's no one Africa, but there are at least 54 Africas, which is the number of the countries, but it's not even correct because we have to talk about the thousands of dialects and languages and tribes. So that is the real Africas. So there is not one. So as soon as they realize that I know some of these, well, it helps a lot, I have to say. And I also have to say that I've been traveled in Africa more than an African, for instance, because well, this is something, you know, that when I think about, you know, I always think that I'm a lucky person, of course. And, you know, because I like to travel in big cities, big capital cities like Lagos or Kigali. Hopefully next year I will be there, or well, all the capital cities I've been to, I really enjoyed very much, as well as in the rural areas. And I have to say that the most important thing of my job for me is that, you know, I go, even if I try to fight the stereotypes or my preconcetti, come si dice?
Preconceived notions?
Yeah. Or sometimes I go there because I read a story, okay, I will do this story. So I go in the country and look for that story. But very often I go with an idea and I come back with another idea. Right. And I must be very ready for this. I think this is the most important part of our job.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I have to say that I argue with with journalists, the writing journalists, let's say, because I need, I mean, photographers need more time to understand and to photograph a story.
Right.
And as we have to relate ourselves to the reality, the present, so with what we see, we can't lie. Of course, you know, our point of view, it's an interpretation, of course, of reality, but still, we are working with the reality. We are working what, you know, what our eyes see. And if I go with an idea and I see something else, I will photograph something else. I will not go on with that idea. And this is something that in Africa, for me, for instance, it always happened. I mean, when I come back, after a while, I say, I mean, I know that I didn't understand anything, because Africa, for instance, is, you know, is running, is changing very much. And I feel very often that, you know, I go with an idea and I have to change all the time ideas. And I'm very happy about this.
So bringing back the conversation to Italy to wrap up our conversation, I wanted to ask you about Italy and photography, since I have explored this idea throughout the lectures that I've given over the past 4 months, that Italy has been a little bit, sometimes a little behind in comparison to other European countries when it came to embrace photography, partly because of the Italian heritage, artistic heritage holding it back. How painting and sculpture have always been considered to be much more proper as art forms. And this struggle that, in a way, it's part of the history of photography across the world. You know, whenever you study the history of photography, the 1960s and 70s are a turning point, more or less, for art photography in the United States, as well as the United Kingdom. France already has had a different relationship to photography thanks to the surrealists. Italy had its moment with the futurists that then ended up in the propaganda, fascist propaganda supporting Mussolini. But I was wondering what your perspective is in terms of what is contemporary photography now in Italy. What is the general feeling? Do you feel like Italy is coming to terms with the notion that photography is more than objective representation?
That's a good question.
Obviously, also because you work across art and reportage in a way. I still read a lot of what you do as having a very evident artistic backbone. You might not agree with that, but I think your reportage work also is very could be displayed easily, and it has been displayed in the context of art. So
yes, I have to say that well, things are changed very much. Time, well, the time of the fashion photographer, the time of the landscape photographer, of the photojournalism, it's over. I mean, nowadays, mainly, unless you are a very important and very rich, probably, photographer, able to work just on your research, let's say, you must, you know, work here and there. And I'm exactly one of those photographers. I mean, I don't feel I'm not feeling as an artist or as a famous photojournalist. I'm one of those photographers who work for a living. So, you know, I alternate very much the reportage, the personal research with, and mainly with the literature. I like very much to explore those kind of, you know, links. But I also work very much with architecture photography. because, for instance, nowadays in Milano, since 15 years now, Milano is changing very much. It's now a beautiful city. We are becoming a touristic city that, you know, Milano always has been, you know, considered as the city to go to work, or for fashion, or for design, not for tourism, not for culture, not very much. It's changing very much. And the shape of the city is always changing very much. So I'm working a lot on this. I've been the official photographer of an American company, by the way, called Heinz, which has been in has changed a huge area of Milano that was abandoned since, you know, the Second World War probably, and now, you know, it's one of the most important and fancy and beautiful area. And by the way, is where I am now because my studio is right in the area called Isola, which means island, and that I've been photographed from 2006 till 2016 for 10 years, and I've produced actually also a book out of this. Let me see if I find it in my library, which is this, Milano Porta Nuova. And I had the chance, and I was very lucky to work as you know, you were talking about also important photographers from our heritage, Gabriele Basilico, which is you know, one of, now is unfortunately is dead since a few years, but has been a very important master of photography, black and white photography, architectural photography. But he was an artist because I mean, when you photograph buildings, it's like I do for a living in this period, you can choose to photograph, you know, the buildings for the company that you're working for, which is fair enough. Or you can decide to photograph those buildings with your personal point of view and make your, you know, artistic choices, like Gabriele Basilico was doing. I try to do both things. So I get paid to give, you know, to photograph those buildings in the way that they ask me. But in the same time, I take a few time to also to photograph like I want. And mainly how I want is, you know, the connection between people and architecture. So who's the owner of an architecture? Is the city, is the people, is the architect who has done it, is the workers who has built it. I mean, it's very interesting to you know, understand this.
And in this context, you can flick through some of those images, if you like, in the book to give us an idea of some. In this context, I think, obviously, because you focus in the book on a city like Milan, exactly, your images sway away substantially from the romantic representation of Italy based on monuments and the past, and you really portraying the city as a contemporary living creature, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a kind of, you know, it's both. I mean, it's a kind of creature. It's a living creature, but for sure. But it's also a stage. I mean, a lot of times I felt like I was on a stage and I was, you know, acting my my part. And the city is a huge stage. And but also the working sites are a stage, and I mean the buildings that they are growing, they are, you know, like the VIPs are growing, expecting, you know, to go to the scene, and then they you know, once they are built, they boom straight away became icons, if they are nice or if they are not, which is also very interesting way to see things. You know, for instance, in Milano we have one of the most important brutalist example of architecture, which is the Torre Velasca, and you know, a lot of people hate it. They say, "What is that?" I mean, it's awful. It's ugly. I love it very much, very much. I had the luck, you know, I was lucky enough to work for them, for the people owning the Torre Velasca for a couple of years. I mean, it's impressive. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's not that the point. The point is not that it's beautiful or not. The point is that the owners of this tower is the old citizens, and I mean, and the tower doesn't care.
That's a beautiful poetic point upon which we can wrap up our conversation. It's been a great pleasure to spend an hour with you, Marco, and getting the opportunity to know your work more. I invite everyone here tonight to take a look at Marco Garofalo's website. You can just Google his name and it will come up online. Maybe add in the word photography just to make sure you narrow your focus.
Yeah, marcogarofalo.com is the website, because if you type Marco Garofalo, sometimes, you know, there is a come si dice, a choreographer. That's my name. So you might see, you know, some ballets.
Might get confusing.
Even if I like but,
entertaining. Marco, Giovanni, thank you very much. I appreciate and enjoyed especially this conversation, because then I think also our audience, after 6 lectures about the history of photography, it's been very intense in a way to touch, you know, the practice of a photographer and its everyday practice and the raw material that a photographer has to deal with, and especially the topic is how you deal with these and how you face such topics has been very stimulating for me, and I'm sure for our audience as well. And I hope we will be able to cross our paths as well in the future, because we are definitely going to keep a very strong focus on contemporary art and on photography. Also for very selfish reasons, because both me and Giovanni like the photography very much. So, and that's definitely a good point. So thank you very much, Marco, for being with us. I invite everyone else to follow next week at the same time our final talk of the series with photographer Silvia Camporesi. And so, Marco, of course, you are welcome too if you want to join the conversation.
why not?
And with this, I wish everyone a good night to Marco and a good evening to everyone else. Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Yeah.
Arrivederci.